Okay, well, let's get started. I'm Daniel Becker, Small Fruit and Vegetable Extension Associate, University of Kentucky, and we'll be talking about a few uncommon fruits that can be grown in Kentucky gardens. So I'd first like to start out with the potential. Some of these are natives, and so they can be some sustainability associated with them, specifically fewer pests and potentially less spraying, especially compared to some of our non-native fruits like apples, pears, and peaches, the ones that are more popular. Also, there's some landscape interest associated with them. Some of them can be quite pretty trees, especially if they can have very showy blooms and they can have interesting growth habits, and some of them all can be very nice fall color specimen plants. And they offer new experiences, especially tastes and textures that you don't find in the store. And if they do have fewer spraying, you know where your fruit comes from and what's been applied to it. And then some have been advertised as being antioxidant superfoods. Though sometimes those antioxidants come along with a few downsides, namely sometimes bitterness. So there are some that have high antioxidants, but they may not be pleasant to eat, or they may require a lot of processing, which can degrade the antioxidants. So, and there's many different types. You look in the nursery catalogs, and they list some of these less common fruits that are out there, and they give them glowing reports. And they don't necessarily list the downsides, which is one of the reasons why I came to this presentation, is that I think that it's better to be an informed consumer and know what you're going to get. So there's a few considerations when we're growing uncommon fruits, and just to consider which ones to select. Hardiness is one of the first ones that many people go to because they are listed in the nursery catalogs along with the description. And USDA hardiness zones are used widely, and they're listed in different zones like 7A, 7B, 6B, and they're based on the expected minimum temperature during an average winter. And they're based on the rolling average of the previous 30 years. A new one came out recently based on the averages from 1990 to 2020. And they're separated into 10-degree Fahrenheit zones with 5-degree Fahrenheit ranges for subzones. Because these are averages, they're not the extreme that is possible. It can certainly get colder, and I direct you down to the table below, where it shows the past 8 or so years, and from 2016 to 2020, we had 0 days with cold extremes below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So those are average, especially if we're down in Marshall County, which is 7A, temperature range 0 to 5. So that's average. But the year before, 2015, during that year, it got down to negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit there. So that is basically almost a zone colder. So it's, and then after that, it got down 2022, a little bit colder, -6. So it's a slightly colder that winter during that one event. So to be safe, when you're choosing plants out of a catalog, it's best to choose plants that are at least 1 to 2 zones hardier, especially if you want consistency in production and don't want extreme winter injury or to have to replant if they're killed back to the ground. So in 7A, it's best to just have an insurance of choosing maybe at minimum a hardiness to zone 6A at the very least. There. Next consideration is chilling requirement. And chilling requirement is, you can think of it as an alarm clock. After a plant goes dormant in the fall, it needs a certain amount of chilling to begin waking up in the spring. It's the amount of cold or number of hours needed to break dormancy. And it's an adaptation to keep plants from growing too early in the spring. After that chilling is satisfied, the amount of cold satisfied, the plant can remain outwardly dormant. But if growing conditions remain unfavorable, for instance, too cold, too dry, not enough sunlight out. But once warm temperatures and those day lengths start increasing, that'll cause dehardening in the plant. So once once it is in dormancy, internal dormancy, that's at its maximum cold hardness. After that internal dormancy condition breaks, warm temperatures will cause them to deharden, and it'll become less tolerant to cold temperatures. During warm temperatures, that dehardening will increase, and it'll never meet the amount or reach the amount of hardiness that it had during full dormancy. Buds start expanding, water starts coming in, and the clock starts ticking to eventual bud break. So there's a danger in growing low chill plants that are sometimes the most hardy ones, especially ones that have come up from the northern plains. You can see that bubble up there at the chill hour map. That requires fewer chilling hours because the winter there keeps those plants dormant. And once winter is over, it's usually over, warms up consistently, and those plants are primed and ready to go. Down here in Kentucky, we have variable winter, and so plants need to be are naturally adapted to this area, have higher chilling because they know not to get tricked by a warm January. So if you choose a plant that's low chilling, chilling requirements satisfied in December, cells can become active after a prolonged thaw, and then if they do, winter kills possible and early bud break is likely, which equals crop loss. Also, there's climate consideration. Native habitat determines adaptation. So for cranberries, they're adapted to boreal areas, northern areas. They like long, cold winters, or they're adapted to that, and short, mild summers, and relatively lower humidity and lower rainfall also. First, like muscadines, they like the hot, long summers, but they're not very winter or cold tolerant. So we do have some muscadines, native ones that come up in Kentucky, but only in the very extreme southern portion where winters don't get very cold. So here, the best types of plants to choose are the ones that are hot, like hot, humid summers, mild winters, and can tolerate humidity and evenly distributed precipitation throughout the year. And successful cultivation consistently requires acknowledgement of the adaptation range of these uncommon plants. And attempting to grow too far out of place causes problems, specifically with injury and with fruit rots. Just to get started into this, some of the ones that can be grown or might be an option, Juneberries and service berries, they're Amelanchier genus. They are members of the rose family. They're related to apples. And if you look at the fruits, especially at the butt ends or the calyx ends of the fruit, they look a lot like just little bitty apples, except they're blueberry sized. And there's a lot of different species in North America and around the world as well. And some of the other synonyms for the northern adapted ones include Saskatoons or Sarvis berries. Those are ones that are adapted in North Dakota, Canada, those areas. The June and service berries And some of their crosses are adapted to the central US, and they tend to exist in a forest edge or understory habitat. So they can take a little bit of shading. I notice them most often in the spring with their showy blooms along the roadsides. They form small bushes, small multi-stem trees, and some of the northern ones up in Canada can become quite large. But the Juneberry serviceberry, about 10 to 25 foot tall, depending on the species or cultivar, and the appropriate spacing about 10 foot, maybe 15 foot if you like specimen plants in your yard. They're fairly adaptable, though they do prefer slightly acidic and higher organic matter soils. I guess that's why I see them along roadsides and ditches. And they tolerate shade, which can actually make some of the fall color more intense. But if you're looking for fruit production, full sun is best. So again, blueberry size, blue, black fruit. The blooms are self-fertile and they bloom soon after flowering pears. So if you're wanting to replace a flowering pear tree, a Juneberry is the one I would go with for spring blooms. 2 to 4 years to bearing, and they ripen in June and July. Fruits are used in preserves and jellies. They can be processed. And some varieties like Autumn Brilliance are been selected for good fall color. They might not be the most productive, but those ones can produce do double duty in a landscape. Downsides because they are small, birds do love them, and they have a mild apple-like flavor. It can be a little bit mealy, sweet and low acid. Fruit fresh, eating them fresh is an option, but they're not going to be like biting into an apple. So, and if you do choose to process them, just be aware that long cooking will further diminish flavor, and it's better to blend them with something acidic to punch up that those aromatics. My guess is they're also susceptible to many of the same rose family pests like cedar rust, fire blight, and plum curculio, ones that affect apples, but not quite so severe. Next up is pawpaw. It's the largest native fruit, and I put down 3 to 6 inches, but some of the named cultivars will be larger than 6 inches long and larger than 2 to 3 inches wide. And some of them will be larger than 1 pound. Full size, 15 to 25 foot tall, pyramidal tree shape, and about the same spacing, a little bit closer when you're planting them out. And they only require minor pruning and a little bit of branch spreading, but just be careful. Don't spread those branches too far because they have brittle wood and they're more often to snap. 45-degree branch angle is acceptable with pawpaw. They're adaptable yard conditions, so work out well for them. But neutral soil and well-drained soil is best. If it's poorly drained, they tend to sucker a bit more, in my opinion. Otherwise, they can be very pretty trees, especially in the fall with their golden color. And in the summer, their leaves look tropical. They're actually close relatives of tropical species like cherimoya. They flower in the late spring, and the flowers are not showy unless you get up close to them. They're dark and but they can be pretty up close. And they're pollinated by flies and beetles. Some people say the flowers are kind of a little bit smelly, a little bit like carrion. I don't get that. I think they smell sort of like old onions to me, but that's just me. But they're attracted to flies and beetles, little insects, and not bumblebees or honeybees. And they're also compound ovaries, 1 to 4 per flower. And that means that if all of those are pollinated, you get 1 to 4 fruits are attached at the stem end on a shoot. Ripen August to September, and about 160 days after bloom. And it's important to choose named or grafted trees for larger fruit size and better flavor. Some nursery catalogs will sell seedlings. Those will produce small fruit and they might not be as good a flavor. So choose the grafted ones, even if they're a little bit more expensive. I think they taste like banana pudding when they're green and soft. I like them a little bit more dead ripe with black spots on them or black splotches. I think that they get a little bit more of a spicy character at that stage. Um, uh, After you harvest them, you'll need to process them because they don't last very long, but you can refrigerate about a week. If you wait too long to refrigerate them, because again, they are tropical relatives, they may develop off flavors. They may blacken, like bananas. Don't store bananas in the refrigerator. Uh, Pulp them, pulp freezes well. Just scoop out, separate the seeds, puree, and put them in a container. You can make smoothies, bake puddings, breads, pie, or what I think is probably, if these are ever going to be commercially viable, is processed into ice cream. Very nice. Downsides, again, these are pollinated by little flies and beetles that don't move very far and don't do a really good job at pollination. So they need to be different trees, different cultivars to cross pollinate need to be closely spaced, no more than 100 foot between trees. That's why you don't see many pawpaws in the timber unless there's two different selections growing close to each other. They tend to form thickets, and if you see a thicket of pawpaws, they're likely all clones of the same plant. And even then, less than 1% fruit set, and you get maybe at a maturity about 15 to 20 pounds per tree normally. They also tend to sucker from the rootstock, so you can cut or mow to control rootsuckers to prevent them from forming thickets. Many of our native plants are colony forming plants in North America. They tend to be small trees. Young trees have first set out may be sensitive to sunlight, so you can get a little bit of leaf crisping or burn, especially if they're seedlings. Though if they're grafted, there's some question about whether or not protection's needed at that first year, because that grafted portion is from an older, mature portion of a mother tree. So if you want to, you can protect them by suspending burlap or a fabric over the tree, or you could just let them go, and next year they'll be fine. Good. For persimmons, you can separate these into three different categories: the American ones, the Asian ones, and the hybrids of American and Asian. With the American, the fruits are smaller and astringent until dead ripe, basically falling off the tree. Then they're soft, sweet, and aromatic, and I think they actually have better flavor than the Asian ones. Well suited to Kentucky growing conditions because they are native. Then the Asians, the fruits are larger, and some are seedless and non-astringent, depending on whether or not they're pollinated, or if they're, because there's different pollination variants of the Asian persimmons. There's some are that require pollination to become non-astringent. There's some that it doesn't matter. And then there's some that they can be, they're astringent either way. So these tend to be marginally hardy in Kentucky, especially Western Kentucky. So they're going to have winter injury some years, even in zone 7, and then about 1 year in 10, you're going to have severe winter injury when we get a severe cold snap. They also go dormant and harden slowly in the fall. So we get a severe cold snap in December. That's going to mean that these ones are going to be more susceptible or more likely to experience winter injury. And then the hybrids have combinations of both parents. So for the American persimmons, these are the larger trees and they're more upright. So they form mid-sized trees and can be spaced about half as wide as they are tall. Choose named and grafted for fruit quality, basically larger fruit size, sweeter, better flavor. Most of the ones that are available from nurseries are grafted, not seedlings, are going to be 90 chromosomes. They're the northern race. They're the ones that produce a larger fruit size. Whereas down here in Kentucky, we get some overlap, especially in the South. But most of the ones down here, especially in Western Kentucky, are 60 chromosomes. They're smaller and not quite as good. Female and male flowers are mostly on separate trees. And what's the benefit with these 90 chromosomes is some of them, especially some of the selected ones out of the nursery, named ones, can be seedless fruit set if they're unpollinated. So they can be seedless. And then the male and female flowers in separate trees is just a general. It's not exact because some female trees can produce a few male flowers or perfect flowers, and some male trees can produce a few female or perfect flowers as well. Downsides, the fruits are very soft and jelly-like when ripe, and they require detaching naturally. They'll detach naturally when they're fully ripe, and then they drop. So if they're over a hard surface, they can split and pop, and they don't all drop at once. So I wouldn't locate them near walkways. And underneath, when they're about ready to harvest, you can let the grass grow tall or place mats under trees and pick up the fruit as it falls. The roots are brittle and they're difficult to dig and transplant. So choose wisely where you're going to place that tree because that's where it's going to be. And then they take longer to bearing, 5 to 8 years. And also when processing, you need to separate the skins and the seeds from the pulp. Asian persimmon hybrids, they're just crosses of American and native or Asian persimmons. And basically they're larger fruit than American and better hardiness than the khaki. They also set fruit when unpollinated like the Asian, and they produce smallish trees, wider, more spreading than the American ones, but a little bit taller than the khaki ones. So about 15-foot spacing between trees. Uh, Graft unions can be a little bit less hardy, so they might need a little bit of protection when young. And then the non-astringent types do not exist. They're all pollination constant astringents. So whether or not they're pollinated, they'll be astringent until they're dead ripe and soft like the Americans. Mulberries, just to go briefly over this, there's 3 different species, the white ones, the red ones, which are native, and the black ones. We're all should be fairly familiar with this, but they tend to produce fairly large medium or moderate sized trees, except for the black ones, which are smaller. Hardiness is zone 5 to 9, with the black ones only to zone 7 to 9, so they are going to be marginally hard here. They have variable leaf shape, unlobed or lobed, and then most have 3/4 inch to 1.5 inch fruit size. Though some, like the Nigra, which is cultivar name common as Pakistan, can be 3 inches long or longer, and better flavor, in my opinion, than the natives. They're adaptable, need full sun. They'll grow up in very poor soil and only need minimal pruning when young to establish a framework. Otherwise, they're relatively carefree afterward, and they have minor pests like aphids and scale that can produce honeydew. And then the white ones, the alba, has a disorder called popcorn fruit disorder, which will make the fruits look like little popcorn kernels. And it gets infected, that tree is infected, best to just cut it down. And it makes the fruits unedible. Late spring bloom, they're self-fertile, and they ripen early to late summer. The black ones ripen the latest. And most are juicy and sweet with low acidity. I don't think they have much flavor or aromatics at all, except for the Negra, which does tend to have more flavor. And the flavor only develops very late after the acids drop, though slightly underripe ones can be better for preserves and better for baking. But they're used in mostly in processing, and they're best mixed with something tart to punch up the flavor. Downsides, the trees are messy, they're tedious to process, they get large enough and they're spread fruit everywhere, and the birds love them. And the stained sidewalks and decks, and then seedlings that come up everywhere, especially in your garden beds. Elderberry, there's three different species that are out there, and I'm sure there's more, but the main ones are the American black ones, European, and the Pacific Northwest blue. All are similar habits. They require similar growing conditions. They can cross readily. The European and Pacific Northwest ones are less cold hardy and heat tolerant, so I just focus on the American types. And there are named cultivars out there of them with larger uh, kind sizes and larger fruit cluster sizes. They readily colonize ditches, fed rose pastures, any area that's been unmowed, and they tolerate wet soils and even some flooding when dormant. So this is a good option if there's a low spot in the garden that gets standing water during the winter. Medium to tall bush, about 6 to 9 foot tall and wide, and they have a perennial crown with short-lived hollow canes that live 3 to 5 years on average. Can tolerate full sun, especially for more fruit production. If you want individual plants about 10 foot apart, or if you want to establish a head, plant about 5 foot apart. Partially self-fertile, they're both wind pollinated and insect pollinated, and August to September harvest, right about now. And they're used in processing primarily. The flowers are added to batter as a filler mostly. They don't contribute much flavor, and the flowers can be added to tea, though not much flavor. Easy to care for once established. First year, set the crown, control weeds with mulch and a cool soil, fertilize with a half cup of 10-10-10, water them consistently, and then the second year you can fruit them, and then up the fertilizer to 1 cup at bud break. You want to prune them annually because they can become overgrown and old and brushy. And you have two options. You can remove or basically mow down all the canes, and then they'll regrow and flower at the tips. Or you could do selective pruning of second and third year old canes and remove them once they reach their second or third year. The difference between the two options are the selective pruning, you get more fruit, but with the mowing down each season and regrowing, you get larger cluster size and more concentrated harvests. Downsides, they'll sucker away from the crown. You could have a crown and then you'll start having suckers about 10 foot away and they'll start colonizing. So they're not well-natured in that regard. Birds love them, and processing can be tedious because you have to separate the berries from the cones. Other pests, spotted winged Drosophila, which is a little fruit fly that infects ripening fruit. Cane borers, rust, and canker. Though with the borers, rust, and canker, those can be eliminated by mowing down the canes each season. And then processing is better because some are sensitive to the ripe fruit and can cause upset stomach. But this is all by freezing, cooking, or drying, which denatures that metabolite. And then the roots, leaves, and stems and unripe fruit are considered toxic. You don't want to eat those. Currants, gooseberries, and jossaberries, I consider them all together because they're all related. They're in the ribus genus. Currants come in black, red, and white. And then the black ones can be separated into European, clove, and American types or species. The European ones have the best quality of the black currants. They're aromatic, resinous, almost piney in flavor. Whereas the clove and Americans tend to be a little bit less intense flavor, but they have better adaptation and disease tolerance. Then the red and the whites have milder flavor, and they're also less tolerant of leaf diseases. Gooseberry, tart, but good flavor in my opinion. Same genus. And most of the ones that are available in nurseries are from American and European crosses. They have fair to good flavor, and they fair to good adaptation. And then the Ossberry is just blackcurrant and gooseberry cross, though they have a good fruit size and not quite as problematic leaf diseases as gooseberries. So they can be a stand-in for gooseberries. 3 to 6 foot tall bushes. The taller bushes are the natives. The shorter ones are the non-natives when they're trained to a bush. Reds and whites can be trained to a single stem and trellis, though that's a bit much in my opinion. Lots of labor there. Small tart fruits, ripen June to July pretty consistently, and they're used mostly for juice, jams, pie, and wine. So I like black currants fresh. Not everyone does. Uh, Black currants, gooseberries, and yosberries have single fruits or small 2 to 4 fruit clusters. Both red and white currants have longer, larger fruit clusters called straights. 3 to 6 foot spacing, same tall as wide. And they tolerate some shading because these are a little bit more heat intolerant, especially the reds and white currants out there. They can actually do better in Kentucky summers with a little bit of shading in the afternoon. First year planting, just mulch and pull all fruit to develop. Fertilize them similar to elderberries. In the second year, keep only 3 to 5 new 1 year vigorous canes. Prune out any older ones, and then continue pruning third and fourth year until the bush is a mix of 1 and 3 to 3 year old canes, and then remove any canes 4 years old and older. Mature bush should have 15 to 20 canes at maturity. Choose ones that are white pine blister rust tolerant or resistant. I don't know if there's any out there that are truly resistant though. But white pine blister rust was introduced about 1900, and it requires ribus species to complete the disease cycle. It's led to a federal ban up to 1966. So prior to 1900, ribus species were actually fairly common in backyard gardens. And after that ban in early 1900s, federal agent went out and state agent went out and basically told people to pull up those ribus from their backyard gardens, and they sort of disappeared. There's still some states and municipalities that still do ban planting ribus, especially to protect the logging industry. If you do have white pines around, reduce the spread by planting, and you want to plant a susceptible one, plant about 1,000 foot away from the other trees. Other downside, birds will take a few, and they can suffer in the summer heat here. Again, they're more northern adapted up in northern Europe, especially with the currants and certain gooseberries. They bloom early, so can have frost losses, but cross-pollination with another cultivar helps. Some of the black ones do require cross-pollination, but most are self-fertile, at least partial. Powdery mildew, leaf spots, and can defoliate. Ones is susceptible, especially certain gooseberries and certain red and white currants. You can leaf rake, and 3 to 4 sprays of Captan from between bud break and post harvest will take care of most of those leaf spots. The Cornelian cherry, member of the dogwood family, similar to our native dogwoods. These are native to Eastern Europe and West Asia, and they were part of Roman and Middle Age monastic gardens. I believe probably mostly for the ornamental nature. They can be stunning, have stunning yellow blooms. They look like yellow clouds. very early in February and March, and bees and bumblebees love them. So these ones can be very pretty trees. And the blooms are frost tolerant, so total fruit loss is rare. They are hardy to our zones, and they produce small or multi-stem trees, though they can be pruned as a single trunk. This tends to produce suckers. About 15 to 20-foot spacing needed, as tall as wide. And they like well-drained soil, neutral pH, and they can do well in full sun to partial shade. They ripen July to September, depending on the variety, and they can come in yellow or red fruit color, and then the fruits can be barrel or pear shaped. A little bit larger than half an inch long in length, but the large pits take about half of the fruit there. And then choose a variety specifically for fruit production. There are some that are specifically ornamental that produce few fruits. And if you're interested in fruits, choose ones for the fruit production, named ones. The fruits have a chewy texture with flavor slightly like an unripe cherry, and they're used mostly in processing. Downsides, because they are small, are tedious to pick, and because they have large pits, tedious to pit as well. Birds love them, so don't place them near walkways. And then they have very hard wood. So boars or other dogwood pests may or may not be a problem. I'm betting that woolly apple aphid is a problem on Cornelian cherry. Jujubes are Chinese dates, small trees in the buckthorn family, and specifically that thorn part's going to become important. Southeast Asian native, adapted to a subtropical climate. So they're only marginally hardy here is what I would consider. They can have winter injury, and they can have issues with breaking dormancy early. So there can be frost losses as well. Flower early, 3 to 5 years after planting, and they have very small blooms and bloom on new shoots with leaves attached. Most are partially self-fertile. They're widely adapted, and they thrive in the heat, full sun, and they're actually tolerant to drought. And pruning entails mainly to maintain a spreading open canopy. Minimal pruning is needed. Fruits are small, cherry to small plum size, and they're about 50% pit, like the Cornelian cherry. They have a long picking window. They don't ripen all at once. Every few days between August and October. They have, when they are ripe, they can be picked at different stages, mottled to brown surface coloration, a crisp and mild apple taste. When they're overripe and they begin to wrinkle, they get sweeter and spongier as they start drying. And they can be used eaten fresh, especially the crisp, mild apple taste ones, mottled brown, or overripe if they're allowed to wrinkle on the tree, baked, and they can be fully dried in place of dates. I like them better than dates because I think dates are a little bit too sweet for my taste. Some cultivars are armed with spines, and if they're because they're grafted, and the grafted ones are just non-named varieties, they can send up spiny suckers from the roots, especially if those roots are cut. So don't cultivate around the tree, or else you have a hedge of thorny suckers. And if it's humid and rainy during ripening time, they're not going to dry fully on the tree, and they'll split and drop due to the excess rain. So if you want to have them dried, best to pick them when they're fully brown, take them off and put them in the dehydrator. Common figs, they are tropical plants grown in a subtropical region. They'll top kill at about 10 degrees Fahrenheit and regrow from the crown. Fruit set at the leaf axils without pollination, parthenocarbically. And they're ready to harvest when they're fully colored, hanging down, and I think a little bit wrinkled. Chicago Hardy is the most common for in-ground. If you want to choose others to try, choose ones that are hardy. vigorous because larger canopy is going to produce more figs, and the earliest ripening. So if you choose ones that ripen the earliest and they'll harvest up till frost, that's a longer picking window, more figs to pick. And choose ones that will be fruit, again, early after being killed back. And then ones that have a smaller closed eye to help prevent rots. And then ones that are tolerant of fig rust, even ones that are listed resistant will get fig rust, like Chicago Hardwood, but it's not going to totally defoliate the plant. Downsides, low yield, you get maybe 2 pounds per plant. Birds and wasps may take a few, though they're not terrible pests. Range will cause splitting and rotting if the eye is open. And then fresh is not like dried preserves or bars. They're going to be less sweet, milder flavor. You have to pump in a lot of sugar to get them up to that level of sweetness in the preserves. And the fruit doesn't store well, about 1 to 2 days, and they don't refrigerate because that'll cause off flavors and darkening. And then the white latex sap can be irritating some people with sensitive skin. Haskaps, those are native to Japan, and they're different from honeyberries. Honeyberries are native to Russia, and they're more intolerant to our hot summer temperatures, even though they're more hardy. So when you look at a nursery, choose the ones that are specifically called Haskaps, not honeyberry. The fruit's tart with a blueberry-like flavor, bit milder, bloom early to March to mid-April, but the flower buds are frost resistant, so limited fruit pops. They survive in Kentucky, but do better in a more moderate northern climate. And they're best in a slightly shaded area where they get, it's a little bit cooler in the late evening. They'll get phytophthora root rot like blueberries and wet soil, so best to plant them on a raised bed. Birds will take some, powdery mildew and leaf spots will happen. And the fruit's soft when ripe, drops, so and it also has a short shelf life. Others, aronia or chokeberries, these are ones that there was some buzz about a couple of years ago because of very high antioxidants. These are more ornamental, in my opinion. They're pretty bushes, especially in a hedgerow, with white flowers in the spring and really good fall color, red to dark red, burgundy almost. But the fruit's small, it's astringent, drying on the palate when ripe, and it's unpleasant to eat when fresh. You got to cook them a lot and add a lot of sugar to them to make them edible, in my opinion, even in health bars. And that negates some of the benefits of antioxidants, especially if you have to cook them a long time, which denatures the antioxidants. Chinese mulberry, and Mikkusu dogwood, I group them together because they're both related to the dogwood family. They're ornamental, pretty trees, but lukewarm, mild flavor. Nothing to write home about. They're more ornamental. Nanking and bush sour cherry, good flavor, but especially with the Nanking cherry, small fruit size. They're like little bitty dots or little spots on the tree. And the Nanking has short stems, which can make picking tedious. Typical cherry pests and the leaf spots, especially in a trial a couple years ago with up in Lexington, without sprays, leaf spots will cause excessive defoliation. So these are ones that are, if you're not going to treat them and spray them for leaf spots, they're better adapted up in North Dakota and Canada. Autumn olives, sea buckthorn, gummy, they'll grow here, all in the Alleghany family. Bushes are small trees, tart astringent fruit. I consider them invasives. So if you want to try autumn olives and do something with them, go out to a roadside, find one that tastes good because they are variable in that respect, and pick them and use them for what your needs are. Because birds have spread them and they'll just come up everywhere. Maypop, passion flowers, they are native, a herbaceous vine that forms rhizomes and come up annually. Very showy flowers. They're pretty on an arbor trellis. Fruits are tart, and I think they're actually better when they're slightly wrinkled. fully yellow. They have a lemon-like lime flavor, but they're an aggressive grower and they sucker readily. So they can become a noxious weed. In fact, my sister has them in her backyard, and now suckers are coming up 10 feet away through concrete. Asian pears, they're the European pear relative called apple pears. They can be harvested ripe right off the tree and don't need chilling. Crisp, mild flesh, but choose fire blight tolerant varieties. Ones like Olympic, Korean Giant, or Shinko or Shirzuro. Ones are fairly tolerant to fire. Alpine and musk strawberries. They have better flavor than the larger strawberries, commercial production, but they're very small. The fruits are about the size of the tip of your pinky or index finger nail. The alpine ones tend to stay put with few runners, and the musk ones have male and female separate plants, so you have to stake and know where your male is, and they have many runners that'll take over a bed. The goji berry, also called wolfberry or matrimony vine, they're sprawling habit if they're not trellis, so they'll spread along the ground. They're also thorny and they need very well drained soil. They exist in mountain climates and in semi-arid to arid climates. So they don't take well to clay soils or heavy soils, and they do better on a raised bed. In my opinion, they're nothing to write home about, especially the fresh ones. They taste like bland tomatoes, likes, and the ones you buy at the store are likely soaked in sugar or covered in chocolate, which makes them edible. Medlar, native to Northern European origin, they're heat sensitive down here, so you can grow them, but you're going to deal with fruit rots and stuff. That's going to take a lot of the fruits. Though they can be quite edible after bledding. Basically, what pears go through when they become overripe and very, very soft, almost borderline rotten. And they're good in tarts, butters, and jellies. Maybe Shapovas are a European pear and mountain ash cross. Small trees, partially self. They're pretty trees. They look like pears to me, except the fruit's smaller. Sweet, aromatic, fragrant flavor, but they're notoriously slow to bear, taking a decade to 2 decades to come into flowering. And then after flowering, they're likely fire blight susceptible. Crab apples, hawthorn, mountain ash, and mayhaw, they're all apple relatives, but the fruits, small, tart, and bitter, mealy flesh, susceptible to the same pest as apple. They're better as ornamentals. Beech, Americana, Mariana, and wild plums, and their crosses. Bushes to small trees. Again, the native ones tend to be more colony forming, sucker thorning, so they form thickets. They're not going to be trees. Same pests as cultivated plums, and then the fruits tend to be small, tart, and the skins tend to be bitter. So they're not going to be best for fresh eating, better for preserves and baking. Not recommended. Hardy kiwis. They tolerate the low temps. So they're native Manchuria and Russia. But they deharden quickly and they harden slowly in the fall. So they deharden quickly in the spring, harden slowly in the fall, and they break dormancy early. So if you want to try these out and you're willing to go through and like lay the first year canes down after planting and cover them with straw to protect them, and after that, drag them back up and trellis them. And then the second year, go through and wrap them in straw. Then you can do that and try and baby them through the first couple of years. After that, the trunk becomes a little bit more hardy, and they're not going to kill back to the ground, especially if you get a January thaw and a freeze afterward. After that, the trunks become larger, more hardy, and then you just have to deal with them maybe getting frost losses and the shoots being killed back every so many years in the spring, because they'll bud out earlier than our native grapevines even. And even those and some of our cultivated ones tend to be have frost losses every few years. And once those shoots are killed by frost, if all of them are killed, that's no crop for that year. They don't have fertile secondary shoots. Lingonberry, cranberry, and low bush blueberry, especially the lingonberry, cranberry, and low bush blueberry, the ones that are low growing with fruit close to the ground. In our humid Septembers and Octobers when we get heavy dew, or in our, they can get leaf spots and leaf diseases. And in the spring when we have our rains and they're getting ready to ripen and the humidity comes up from the ground, that can cause excessive fruit rots in our hot and humid climate. So they're not well adapted down here. And the huckleberry is not cold hardy. Hybrids, blackberry and raspberry crosses, and Pacific Northwest brambles. Marionberry, maybe if you baby it along, mulch it heavily with straw in the late fall after the leaves drop, you can get some marionberries. Other ones are just not hardy down here. They come out of dormancy too early. And they just tend not to be adapted very well down here unless you baby them. Plum crosses, they sometimes see in the store, aprons, pluots, Larry's plum cots. They're either not hardy. These ones are actually bred and selected in California, so they do better in a Mediterranean climate. They're too early blooming or they're too disease susceptible. Also, quince, pear relative, can be used as a rootstock for pears, as a dwarfing rootstock. They're small trees and they're not edible fresh. The fruits aren't, so they need cooking to bring out their flavor. Same pest as pear, except they're even more susceptible to fire blight. So don't plant these unless you're willing to have a substantial spray program in the spring during bloom and pre-bloom. And then Asian persimmons, they may survive an average winter in Western Kentucky, but not years with a polar vortex. So 1 year in 10, which is about an average of what we've had, they'll either have severe winter injury, the shoot tips will get killed back, or the trunk will get killed, especially if it's a December freeze, and you have to replant them. Trials over in eastern Kentucky and have found that Shenandoah, it's a non-astringent one, is the hardiest. So if you absolutely want to plant an Asian persimmon, that's the one that's done well, even back during 2015 when it got down to -13 or colder over there, actually. In the handout, there's the select varieties. This is not comprehensive. There are others, but this is an example of perhaps some of the ones that can give you an idea of the ones that have been in trial or have been recommended by others as doing well. And then for plant sources, these are the ones that sell natives and ornamentals and some of these less common fruits, also available in the handout. With that, I will open it to questions.